Imagine waking up tomorrow, not in your bedroom, not in your house, but somewhere in East Africa, 150,000 years ago. You open your eyes, the sun is already climbing above the horizon, there's no bed, no pillow, no blanket, just dirt beneath your back and a sky stretching endlessly overhead. You stand up, you're completely naked, not because someone stole your clothes, because clothes don't exist, nobody has invented them yet, no shirts, no shoes, no hats, no jackets, nothing, and strangely, nobody thinks that's unusual. For your entire life, you've never seen another human wearing anything. This is simply what humans look like. Now imagine trying to survive the day. The ground burns your feet. Thorns scrape your legs. Mosquitoes find every inch of exposed skin. By noon, the African sun feels like it's cooking you alive, then night comes, the temperature drops. The same body that felt too hot during the day now struggles to stay warm. Every sunrise brings a different challenge. Heat, cold, rain, wind, sharp rocks, insects, yet somehow, your ancestors survived like this for hundreds of thousands of years, which raises an obvious question. If humans lived naked for so long, why did we ever start wearing clothes? Who was the first person to wrap an animal hide around their shoulders? And perhaps an even stranger question. Why are humans almost the only large mammals on Earth that need clothes in the first place? Look around nature. Lions don't wear jackets. Wolves don't need boots. Bears never complain that winter is coming. Even animals living in freezing temperatures seem perfectly comfortable. A polar bear survives temperatures that would kill a human within hours. An Arctic fox sleeps directly on snow. A musk ox stands in blizzards that would freeze you solid. Nature already dressed them. Humans are different, in fact. Compared to most mammals, we're strangely unfinished. Your skin is exposed. Your feet are soft. Your body struggles with both extreme heat and extreme cold. At first glance, humans almost seem poorly designed, but appearances can be misleading. Because the same body that looks fragile today once accomplished something almost unbelievable. Imagine chasing an antelope. Not for 30 seconds, not for 5 minutes, for hours. The animal sprints away. You don't. You simply keep walking. The sun climbs higher. Sweat runs down your forehead. Your legs ache. Your lungs burn. The antelope disappears over the next hill. You keep following, hour after hour. Again and again, the animal is forced to run. Again and again, you keep coming. Eventually, the antelope collapses. Not because you were faster, because you never stopped. That strategy is called persistence hunting, and it worked because your body possessed something extraordinary. Sweat. It doesn't sound impressive. Most people think sweating is annoying, embarrassing, something to avoid. But sweating may be one of the greatest evolutionary advantages humans ever developed. Every drop of sweat carries heat away from your skin. Instead of trapping heat beneath thick fur, your body releases it. You become your own cooling system. Most predators can't do that. A lion cools itself mainly by panting. So does a wolf. So does a dog. Eventually they need to stop. Humans don't. We keep moving. Slowly, steadily, patiently. Our greatest hunting weapon wasn't speed. It wasn't strength. It wasn't sharp teeth. It was endurance. And endurance came at a cost to become better runners. We had to lose something. Our fur. Think about your own arm. Tiny hairs still cover it. Now imagine those hairs becoming thicker, longer, covering your entire body. That's what your distant ancestors probably looked like millions of years ago. Then evolution slowly stripped most of it away. At first, that sounds like a terrible idea. Why would any animal give up one of nature's greatest forms of protection? Fur keeps you warm, protects your skin, blocks sunlight, shields you from insects. Losing it seems like a downgrade, unless the advantage you gain is even greater. Without thick fur trapping heat, humans became endurance specialists. But that also created an entirely new problem. When the sun disappeared, you got cold. When rain fell, you stayed wet. When winter arrived, you suffered. For the first time in human history, nature had taken away something evolution couldn't easily replace, so humans did something no other animal had ever done. Instead of waiting for evolution, they invented their own fur. Not by growing it, by wearing it. But here's where the story becomes strange. Scientists don't actually think warmth was the original reason people started wearing clothes. In fact, the earliest evidence suggests humans may have begun covering themselves long before they ever left the warm climate of Africa. If they weren't freezing, then why bother? The answer may come from one of the most disgusting creatures you've ever seen, a tiny parasite. One that has been secretly following humans for thousands of generations, and without it, we might never have figured out when clothing first appeared, because believe it or not, the oldest witness to human fashion was a louse. Imagine you're an archaeologist. You've spent months digging through ancient campsites. You find stone tools, animal bones, pieces of charcoal from old campfires. But there's one thing you never find: a shirt. Not because humans weren't wearing clothes, because clothes don't last. Leather rots, plant fibers decay. Animal hides disappear long before anyone can dig them up. It's like trying to prove someone owned a newspaper after leaving it outside for 100,000 years. Nature erases almost everything. So how do scientists know humans started wearing clothes at all? The answer wasn't buried underground. It was crawling on our heads, lice, not exactly the hero you'd expect. But evolution has a funny sense of humor. Today, humans have two main kinds of lice. One lives in your hair, the other lives in your clothes. That sounds like a small difference. It's actually enormous. Because clothing lice can't survive without clothing. Take away the fabric. They disappear. Imagine living your entire life inside the folds of a jacket. Your home is the stitching. Your shelter is the fabric. Your food source is the person wearing it. Now imagine that jacket suddenly vanishes forever. So do you. Body lice are completely dependent on clothing, which means they couldn't have existed before humans started getting dressed. That simple fact allowed scientists to do something remarkable. Instead of studying clothes, they studied the parasites living in them. By comparing the DNA of head lice and body lice, researchers discovered that the two populations split apart somewhere around 100,000 to 170,000 years ago. That split marks the moment when clothing became common enough for an entirely new species of parasite to evolve. Think about how bizarre that is. The oldest witness to human fashion wasn't another human. It was a bug. Long before anyone wrote history, long before the first cities, long before agriculture, tiny insects were quietly recording one of the biggest changes in human history. Sometimes evolution leaves clues in the strangest places. But this discovery created another mystery. If people were already wearing clothes over 100,000 years ago, why? They were still living mostly in Africa, a place that wasn't exactly famous for freezing temperatures. If warmth wasn't the original reason, what was? Imagine walking through the African savanna. The grass reaches your waist. Every few steps something brushes against your legs. Tiny thorns, sharp branches, dry grass slicing your skin like paper. By the end of the day, your legs are covered with cuts. Most are small, but every cut is an opportunity. Bacteria, parasites, infection. A tiny wound can become a serious problem when there's no medicine. Now imagine wrapping an animal hide around your waist. The thorns still catch, but they catch the hide instead of your skin. Your legs stay protected. The difference might seem small, but survival is often decided by small advantages: one less cut, one less infection, one more day alive. The same goes for insects. Mosquitoes don't care that you're human. Ticks don't care either. Neither do biting flies. To them, you're simply lunch. Every bite carries risks: disease, pain, blood loss. An animal hide doesn't stop every insect, but it stops enough of them to matter. Then there's the sun. Imagine standing in direct sunlight for 8 hours. No hat, no sunscreen, nothing. Your skin begins to burn. Over time, even simple coverings can make a huge difference. Shade isn't just comfortable, it's protective, little by little. The reasons to cover your body start adding up: protection from plants, protection from insects, protection from the sun, protection from the cold nights. No single reason explains clothing. Instead, each problem nudged humans toward the same solution. Cover yourself, but humans rarely stop at practicality. Give us a useful object, and eventually we'll turn it into something that means much more. Imagine two hunters returning to camp. Both killed an antelope. One simply throws the hide over his shoulders. The other carefully chooses the largest hide, the cleanest one. Maybe it's from a dangerous animal. Maybe everyone knows how difficult it was to hunt. Suddenly, that hide isn't just protection anymore. It's a story. Without saying a word, it tells everyone around the fire, I survived. I hunted. I'm skilled. Humans have always communicated without speaking. A scar tells a story. So does paint. So does jewelry. And eventually, so did clothing. What began as survival slowly became identity. The hide you wore could reveal where you came from, what you hunted, what your family valued, even who you hoped to impress. It's funny when you think about it. More than 100,000 years later, we're still doing exactly the same thing. A business suit tells one story. A military uniform tells another. A wedding dress, a football jersey, a doctor's coat, a leather jacket. None of them are just pieces of fabric. They're messages long before written language. Humans were already wearing information, and that changed everything, because the moment clothing became more than protection, it became culture. And once culture gets involved, innovation speeds up. Animal hides become softer, better fitted, better stitched. Soon, simply throwing a skin over your shoulders isn't enough anymore. Humans begin shaping clothing to fit the body. They invent tools to cut, to punch holes, to sew, and one tiny invention, no larger than your finger, will allow humans to survive places that should have been impossible. A simple bone needle, small enough to fit in your hand, powerful enough to help conquer an ice age. Imagine trying to survive an ice age, not a cold winter, not a bad snowstorm, an ice age. For months, the world doesn't just get cold, it changes. Rivers freeze, winds cut through skin like knives, night feels endless, and your body, your naked body, was never built for this, but somehow humans made it through. Not because they evolved overnight, not because they suddenly grew fur again, but because they figured out something no other animal had ever done. They built a second skin, and the tool that made it possible was smaller than your hand. A bone needle. Before needles, clothing was simple. Rough animal hides draped over the body, held together with knots, vines, or strips of sinew. It worked, barely, but it had problems. Wind slipped through gaps, cold air leaked in. Movement was restricted. It was survival, but inefficient survival. Then something changed. Someone realized a sharp bone could be shaped, not just sharpened, but refined, smoothed, drilled with a tiny hole at the end. And suddenly you could sew. Think about what that actually means. For the first time, humans weren't just covering their bodies, they were designing coverage. Instead of wrapping yourself in a loose skin, you could shape it, tighten it, fit it to your body, seal it at the edges. That one change made clothing dramatically more effective. Warm air stopped escaping, cold air stopped getting in, survival in freezing climates became possible. Not easy, but possible. Now imagine what happens next. A group of humans wearing loose animal hides might survive a mild cold season, but a group wearing fitted, stitched clothing, they can move north, far north, into places no human had ever lived before. And that's exactly what happened. As the Ice Age cycles intensified, humans didn't retreat. They expanded because they finally had technology that traveled with them. Not weapons, not fire, not even tools for hunting, but something far more important. Protection from the environment itself, a second skin they could carry anywhere. And once that existed, the map of the world stopped being a boundary. It became an invitation. But clothing wasn't just about survival anymore. Something else was happening at the same time. Something subtle, something social. Because when humans started sewing clothing, they also started doing something unexpected. They started shaping identity. Imagine two groups meeting on the edge of a frozen valley. Both are human, both speak similar sounds, both hunt the same animals, but they look different, not because of biology but because of clothing. One group wears tightly stitched fur garments designed for extreme cold. The other wears layered hides decorated with bone beads and markings. Before a single word is spoken, each group already knows something about the other. Clothing becomes a signal. A language, a way of saying, this is who we are, this is what we value, this is what we've survived. And in a world where meeting strangers could mean cooperation or conflict, that information matters. A lot. Over time, clothing starts doing even more work. It marks status, experience, role. Some garments become rare, difficult to make, time-consuming to produce, and rarity creates meaning. If everyone wears the same thing, nothing stands out. But if one person wears something that took days of labor to create, that person stands out immediately, not just visually, but socially. Clothing becomes one of the earliest forms of hierarchy. And humans are extremely sensitive to hierarchy. We always have been. So now, clothing is doing three jobs at once: protection from the environment, protection from insects and injury, and communication between people. But there's one more twist coming. Because as humans spread across the Ice Age world, something else is evolving alongside them. Not just clothing, but the systems used to make it: fiber processing, weaving, spinning, trade networks. Entire economies built around keeping people warm and alive, and at the center of all of it is a simple idea. Once you can change your environment instead of adapting your body to it, there's no going back. You don't evolve fur, you manufacture warmth. And that shift is one of the biggest turning points in human history. In the next part, we'll see how clothing stopped being just survival gear and became one of the foundations of civilization itself. At this point in the story, clothing is no longer just about staying alive. It's about something bigger, something quieter, something that slowly reshapes what it means to be human. Because once humans learned how to sew fabric together, they didn't just solve cold weather. They unlocked control over their environment. And that changes everything. Imagine living in a world where your survival depends entirely on what nature gives you. Cold season arrives, you suffer. Warm season returns, you recover. Rain comes, you get soaked. Wind picks up, you feel it directly on your skin. Now imagine the moment that changes. You no longer react to the environment. You design for it. Thicker layers for winter, thinner layers for heat, water-resistant coverings for rain, protective garments for travel. Suddenly, the human body is no longer the limit. Clothing is, and clothing can improve. That's the key shift. But something even more important is happening in the background. Because once clothing becomes customizable, it becomes information. And information spreads, slowly at first, then faster. Imagine a small group learning how to weave plant fibers into thread. At first it's simple, twisting grass, binding strands together, making something stronger than what nature provides. But over time, that knowledge evolves. People discover patterns, techniques, methods that make fabric smoother, stronger, more flexible. And now, clothing isn't just made from animal skins anymore. It's being engineered, woven, designed. In some regions, flax becomes linen. In others, wool becomes the dominant material. In warmer climates, lighter plant fibers dominate. Different environments produce different solutions, but the idea is the same everywhere. Humans don't just wear what they find, they build what they need, and that leads to something huge: trade. Because not every group has access to the same materials. Some have wool, some have flax, some have hides from large animals, some have dyes from rare plants, and suddenly clothing becomes valuable, not just for survival, but for exchange, for status, for identity. Entire trade routes begin forming around materials that seem simple today: fabric, dyes, needles, threads. What looks like clothing is actually one of the earliest global industries. But the most powerful change isn't economic, it's psychological, because clothing quietly rewires how humans see each other. Imagine meeting a stranger in a world without clothes. You see skin, hair, scars, bodies, but almost no immediate social information. Now imagine meeting the same stranger wearing carefully prepared garments. Suddenly you can infer things instantly: experience, group identity, climate adaptation, social role, even status. Clothing becomes instant communication. Before a single word is spoken, your brain is already building a story, and humans love stories. So clothing becomes one of the fastest ways to tell them. Over generations, this effect grows stronger. Certain styles become associated with authority, others with ritual, others with danger, others with celebration, and eventually clothing stops being just something you wear. It becomes something you read. A silent language covering the entire human body. But there's one final transformation. one that turns clothing from a cultural tool into one of the pillars of civilization itself. Because once humans begin living in permanent settlements, clothing becomes part of something larger: economy, identity, and power. A farmer wears something different from a warrior. A leader wears something different from a laborer. A priest wears something different from everyone else. Not because their bodies require different protection, but because society requires visual structure. Clothing becomes a system for organizing people at scale. And once you can organize people visually, you can organize them politically. That's a major step towards civilization. But even after thousands of years, the core idea never disappears. You still wake up. You still choose what to wear. You still send signals without speaking a word. You still decide how the world sees you before you say anything at all. From a naked body in prehistoric Africa to modern cities filled with fashion, uniforms, and identity, the story is the same. Humans didn't just survive nature, they redesigned their relationship with it. And clothing was one of the first and most powerful tools that made that possible. Because in the end, clothes were never just about protection. They were about transformation. Turning a vulnerable animal into a species that could adapt the world to itself. And that's the real reason humans started wearing clothes. Not because they had to, but because they could.